Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Harold Fralich's 1941 Western USA Travel Diary. This was originally published as a Zook Family Memories Collection, or ZFMC, number 34, published on September 8th, 1991, and it was the first, my first family history work after I moved to the Philippines. And Harold, the author of this diary, wrote this foreword from Portland, Maine on May 8th, 1991. Foreword, quote, I graduated from Harding High School in Marion, Ohio in June 1941. The experiences related in this diary are my experiences in my first full-time job. Transylvania University, located in Lexington, Kentucky, conducted 3 educational summer travel tours each summer. This particular tour was their 1941 Western Tour. There were 38 adults on the tour. They had a 1-hour class every morning taught by one of the professors from Transylvania. At the end of the tour, each of the successful students was awarded 3 hours college credit. My sister Barbara was one of the students. I took the job as a crew member. There were 9 members of the crew plus Billy, our crew chief. We were responsible for setting up and taking down the camp. Another of our responsibilities was to prepare, cook, and serve all the meals. As crew members, we were paid $10 per week for our services. In the final 3 days, August 28th, 29th, and 30th, that are covered in this diary, I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, attending the Ohio State Order of Demolay Annual Convention. At that convention, I was elected State Master Counselor for Ohio Demolay, the top administrative position for 1941-1942. Before we start, I'd just like to say that Harold Fralich was my father's first cousin, and they were very close. They were like brothers, and their mothers were sisters. Mary Zook Fralich was Harold's mother, and Gertrude Zook Ray was my father's mother. And so, anyway, they're very close and very similar. Harold was a very good guy, very outgoing, very strong personality, and very personable, good fellow. Travel Diary, a record of travel experiences and adventures, property of Harold Fralich, Marion, Ohio. Long West trip, July 20th to September 1, 1941. July 20th, 1941. We left Marion, Ohio about 4 o'clock a.m. Arrived at Galion, Ohio at 4:30 a.m. The trip from Galion to Lexington, Kentucky was rather interesting. I talked to quite a few Army men, and one man who had been a sailor on the ship Robin Moore. I missed the truck in Lexington, so we'll have to leave with the bus Monday morning. I wandered around with Mother and my sister Barb most of the day, then ate dinner at the Canary Cottage Restaurant and supper at the Phoenix Hotel. The food was fine at both places. The American Legion Convention is in town, so it's still pretty noisy as I close. July 21st. I saw Mother off about 9:15 and left Lexington from Trancy Camp about 9:30. The group seems like they would be swell, mostly women. We ate at the Greyhound Terminal in Louisville at noon and got to camp about 4:30 p.m. I met the crew boys, who all seemed like a good bunch of fellows. They're all from Kentucky. Then we went uptown after supper. Vincennes, Indiana is a rather dull town of about 20,000 people. Stayed in town about 2 hours, then came back to camp, Kimmel's Park on the Nabask River, and went to bed about 11:30 and slept outside. July 22nd. We broke camp this morning about 7:30 a.m. We fellows sat on the back of the truck with the crew manager, Billy Mitchell. The work isn't very hard. Setting up and breaking camp besides doing dishes is all we have to do. We ate dinner outside Salem, Illinois, then went through St. Louis and got to camp about 3 o'clock p.m. After supper, Paul Garrett, Harold Hill, Tom Ewell, and I went in and walked all over St. Louis. We saw most everything downtown and got back to camp and to bed about 1 o'clock a.m. I wrote Ethel a letter. July 23rd. Kansas City, Missouri, Del Mar's Inn, 10 miles out of the city. We started out about 8:30 this morning. I slept most of the morning, and we ate lunch someplace outside of Columbus, Columbia, Missouri, then slept again in the afternoon. I took a sun bath for about an hour, leaning over the top of the truck. We got into camp about 5 o'clock. It took us just 50 minutes to set up camp this afternoon. After supper, we came over to the inn and danced, etc. for about an hour. We had a swell time. This group is really going to be fun. I went to bed about 11:30 p.m. July 24th, Hays, Kansas. Fort Hays Teachers College Campus. Started again about 8 o'clock this morning. We went through Kansas City the first thing. I slept and talked most of the morning. We ate at Manhattan during lunch and got into camp about 7 o'clock and set up in 50 minutes again. Stayed in camp tonight and wrote letters and talked and turned in about 11 o'clock. July 25th, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Manitou Park Springs Camp. We got a late start about 9 this morning. I slept several hours. We ate dinner at a little burg in Kansas, then went through a terrible storm right after we crossed the Colorado state line about 2:30. We had a long talk about women, etc. on the truck this afternoon and got into camp about 7 o'clock tonight. After camp was set up and supper done, we danced for about an hour or so. I danced with Cinnamon, Kate, Ruth, Mrs. Brad, and Barbara. Then I wrote Mother a letter and went to bed about 11:30 p.m. July 26th. I got up about 7:15 this morning. It certainly seems good to be able to stay in camp and not have to pack up and leave so early. We went into Colorado Springs this morning and took in all the shops and stores, but I didn't buy anything. We went up Pikes Peak in the afternoon. It was really wonderful. I'd never seen anything like it. There was an awful storm while we were on top. I wired Mom from the top. I had the best day so far. July 27th. We started about 8:30 this morning. We went across level country for the first couple of hours, but we were slowly rising all the time. We went across Lavette Pass this afternoon early. It's about 9,500 feet. Then we ate dinner at Wilsonburg, Colorado. I got some stickers there. We got into camp about 5:15 and had supper just about dusk. We are camped in a beautiful valley with mountains on both sides. We had a campfire and sang a while. We are camped right on Wolf Creek. I went to bed about 10:30 p.m. July 28th. Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. We got started about 8 o'clock this morning. We were climbing over beautiful mountain roads all morning. Had to take it pretty slow most of the time. We ate in the yard of a filling station. I took a sun bath this afternoon. We stopped the middle of the afternoon at Durango. There were some wonderful things in a shop there, but they were too high. Then we got into camp about 6:30. We're camped in a swell spot on top of a canyon. The bus didn't get here till about 10. They had trouble with the gas line. July 29th. We got up about 6:30 this morning. After breakfast, we started on a trip through the park. We saw all the Indian cliff houses, and they really are unusual. It is hard to describe them. I got a letter from Mother today, and it was good to hear from her. Then I cleaned up my bag and took a shower before supper. Then I went to the campfire and heard a lecture on the Indian women's life. It was very interesting. We saw 3 Indian dances after the talk, then went up to the park lodge for about an hour. July 30th. The Petrified Forest and Painted Desert, Arizona. We got started about 9 o'clock this morning. It is awfully hot even so early. We passed quite a few Indian hogans and small villages, then ate dinner at one small Indian town. This is certainly the country. You very seldom see a white person. We stopped at Gallup, the Indian capital of the USA. Things were high-priced, so didn't buy. We passed more Indian hogans and saw some beautiful rugs, then went through the Painted Desert. I was very disappointed. We got to the Petrified Forest about 7 o'clock and set up camp and went to bed early. July 31st. Coconino National Forest, Arizona. We were on the road by 8:30 this morning and traveled all morning through a desert and passed many Indian hogans and villages, then got into camp about 2:30. We played bridge I played bridge most of the afternoon with Bob, Wanda, and H. We had a late supper. After the dishes were done, we went down to a little campfire. They had a cowboy band there with a fiddler who was plenty good. He sang for about an hour, then talked a while, and finally turned in about 11:30. August 1st. Kaiba National Forest, Grand Canyon. I took a sun bath most of the morning, and I am finally getting a start on a tan. We passed the bus several times during the day, and got into camp and had supper and dishes done by 8 o'clock p.m. I got my first glimpse of the canyon, and words can't express it. You wouldn't really believe it unless you saw it. The colors are really marvelous. We went down to the lodge and listened to a ranger's talk, then saw movies and a dancing program, after which we danced to a swell band for about an hour. I danced with some pretty girls from the park. August 2nd. Finally, a day of rest in camp. Yay, yay! Well, anyhow, a free day. I got up about 7:30 this morning and wrote some letters and went down to the lodge and took in some of the sights with Houston after breakfast, then came back along the trail. I took a tour of the canyon with the group after dinner. We went down to the lodge after supper. I got a letter from Marion and Mother, and I got a date from Jean Pierre from Santa Monica, California. She is a beautiful brunette. We had a grand time and got in late, 1:30 a.m. August 3rd. Zion National Park, Utah. Started about 9 o'clock this morning. I slept on the tailgate this morning and got a suntan. Then ate lunch in a little town called Fredonia. I'm still thinking of Jean. I hope to see her again. We got into camp about 4 o'clock this afternoon. It is a beautiful place. It reminds me a lot of the Garden of the Gods, only on a much grander scale. We are in the canyon, and the rocks tower thousands of feet up. We went to the lodge tonight. I wrote Sally a letter and saw a water carnival, and then went on the moonlight trip with EJ and Drusilla. Good night. August 4th. We left Zion about 9 o'clock this morning and went through some beautiful mountain country about noon. Got to Bryce and had camp set up by 4. Pat, Paul, and I took a hike down in the canyon. It really is wonderful here. Giant spires of brilliant colored rock tower tall around you. There are all different shapes and forms. We got back after supper after an 8-mile jaunt. Then went down to the lodge and saw a movie about Bryce. Then we danced about an hour or so with some cute college girls, mostly from Utah, and listened to the radio and watched the moon for about an hour, then went to bed about 1 o'clock a.m. August 5th. Heath's Tourist Camp, Motel, Salt Lake City, Utah. We got started about 8:30 this morning. I slept several hours. I forgot to mention we went through a tunnel chiseled out of solid rock, going into and coming out of Zion yesterday. Then we went through some more mountainous country today. Salt Lake City is in a valley. We got camps set up about 5 o'clock, then cleaned up and got a haircut finally. After supper, we went to the Coconut Grove Ballroom. It's supposed to be the largest in the world. It's very beautiful, but too big. I danced with all the gals, then ate at a town hall sandwich shop and went to bed about 2:15 a.m. August 6th. Pocatello, Idaho Municipal Tourist Camp. I got up about 6:15 to catch up on my diary and letters. Finished a letter to Anne. I stopped and saw the Mormon temple this morning and passed the Salt Lake about 11. Slept all afternoon and got into camp about 4. The bus was late, so I wrote Mother a long letter. The Mormon temple was very interesting. We went uptown in the evening about 8 with EJ, Ruth, and HH. I bought 25 postcards and sat from 10 till 12:15 writing them. There wasn't much to see in Pocatello. Had Edith B. mail my cards from Sun Valley and went to bed about 1. August 7th. Boise, Idaho Municipal Park. We left Pocatello about 9 this morning. Didn't see much of interest this morning. I don't see where they get the name Scenic Idaho. It's worse than Kansas. We had camp set up about 4:30. We have a beautiful campsite. A bunch of us fellows went swimming in the Snake River. It has a very fast current. It was hot today, so I took a sun bath for several hours. Bob and I walked into Boise after supper. We walked all over town and finally sat and gorged at some ice cream shop. Then walked back to camp and sat and talked for about an hour and turned in about 11:30. August 8th. Pendleton, Oregon, Meitinger's Tourist Camp. We broke camp about 9 this morning and then went through some dead country this morning. Not like I expected, Oregon. We crossed the state line at Weiser about 11. We are traveling on the old Oregon Trail now. I slept after dinner. Finally getting into some pretty rugged mountainous country, more like the Northwest. We stopped at Baker, Oregon about the middle of the afternoon and got into camp and ate supper about 8. The camp is a rather dumpy place about a mile outside of Pendleton, so we stayed and played bridge. B and I won. I got a letter from Mother and went to bed about 11:30. August 9th. Portland, Oregon, the Portland Auto Camp. We left camp at Pendleton about 8 o'clock and got the earliest start we've ever made. The sun was hot this morning, so I stood on the tailgate most of the morning. We followed the Columbia River after dinner for the rest of the day. The river is very wide and blue. We got into the giant pine and fir forests this afternoon. This is what I thought the Northwest would be like. We got camp set up about 5. I went into Portland with the fellows and wandered all around and ate at 5 or 6 places. There was more noise and lights in Portland. We got back to camp about 1 o'clock a.m. August 10th, Mount Rainier National Park, Washington. I got up about 8 o'clock this morning. We left Portland at about 9. I slept most of the morning and part of the afternoon. We crossed into Vancouver, Washington as soon as we left camp and drove through more giant forests. We got in and had camp set up by 6:30. The drive into the park is really beautiful. I saw my first redwoods. They really are giants. After supper, we came up to the lodge. I looked around for about an hour or so and tried to find out about the boy that fell in the crevasse. They are sure he is dead. I turned in about 11. Just Douglas firs, not redwoods. August 11th. I got up about 8:30 a.m. These days in camp are really wonderful. Paul G., Pat, Willie, and I hiked up to the ice caves this morning. It was a tough climb, but it was worth it. The blue in the caves was simply gorgeous. I sat and talked to a ranger up there for about an hour. We planned to take a glacier trip this afternoon, but clouds and fog set in, and it started to rain about noon, so they wouldn't take us. I sat in the lodge and wrote cards all afternoon and ate lunch at the lodge, 65 cents. I stayed in camp all evening because of the rain and fog and got a letter from Mom and Ethel, and I wrote to Ethel. August 12th, Woodland Park, Seattle, Washington. I got up about 6:30 this morning. It's still very cloudy. You can't see the peak. Camp was pretty wet, so it took us till about 9:30 to get loaded. We ate dinner at a place about 20 miles from Tacoma and got into Seattle about 2:30. We have a beautiful campsite in a park. I went swimming in the lake. Swell water. Bob, Wanda, Edith, and I went into Seattle after supper and looked over the place and came home about 10:30 and wrote Mother a letter. Seattle impresses one as being a much bigger city than it is. I turned in about 11:30. Got cleaned up tonight for once, tie and all. August 13th. Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. I got up this morning about 6:15 and took a shower and washed my hair. We left Seattle about 9 and crossed the border about 2 this afternoon. We didn't have any trouble at all getting into Canada. We stopped at a lake resort that was beautiful but decided not to stay there because we don't think the bus could make it over the roads. I got 2 letters from Mother today. Finished supper and the dishes about 8. Then walked into Chilliwack and looked around for about 5 minutes. Saw everything to be seen, so we came back and went to bed about 11. August 14th. We left Chilliwack about 9:30 and drove along a beautiful mountain drive along the Fraser and Thompson rivers. The roads are terrible, but the scenery is lovely. We saw several camps of soldiers and lots of army trucks on the road. and got into camp at exactly 9:30 after 12 hours on the road, then set up in the dark. I took a quick swim in the Thompson River before supper, swell diving boards, etc. Some fellows got us dates, so we went over to Dorothy's house and sang till about 2. I met her mom and dad, who was a fur dealer. We went uptown afterwards and went to bed about 3:30 a.m. August 15th. Dot came over at 7 this morning and got us up to go swimming. We broke camp after the swim and left Kamloops about 9:30, then went over some terrible roads. We had to unload the truck to ferry it across some river this afternoon, and finally got it across okay. I believe all the roads are bad in Canada. We are getting into the Canadian Rockies now. Now and then we see these huge glaciers and mountain streams. We went into town about 11, not much there. Talked to some boys who were Canadian Scouts for about an hour. They gave me a lot of Canadian Scout badges, including a King Scout badge. I went to bed about 12. August 16th, Golden, British Columbia, Canada. We got an early start this morning, left about 8:30. The mountains are getting higher and more beautiful, and the roads worse and more dusty. Between Revelstoke and Golden, 193 miles. We didn't pass anything except 2 filling stations and got into camp about 6. Willie and I tried to swim in the Kicking Horse River, which we were camped right on the bank of, but it was terribly fast and freezing cold. I believe it's the coldest water I've ever been in. It's glacier fed. We didn't get very far and gave it up as a bad bet. I got my ritual from Sally today. We went into Golden, nothing there. Went to bed about 12. I sat up with Dee for a while after I got back. August 17th, Lake Louise. I got up a little early, about 7, and caught up on my diary and wrote some cards. The envelope my ritual came in had been open for censorship. Finally got it straightened, and we can go on to Lake Louise and Banff. Started to Lake Louise about 11. We had to unload the baggage from the bus because it was too heavy for some of the bridges. Tom and I stayed and waited with the bags from 12:20 until 6:10. We went swimming in the KH River while waiting, and went down to the chateau after supper. The setting of the hotel is really wonderful. We saw Aileen Moody, the girl at Grand Canny. Talked till about 11:30, then walked back to camp. A bear scared the wits out of me on the way back. August 18th, Banff, Alberta, Canada. We got up about 8 o'clock a.m. and broke camp and went down to the hotel. The setting here is really magnificent. The chateau is on one side, then the real blue lake stretches out for about a mile, then the mountains with the huge glaciers on top. Wow. We went boating and left Lake Louise about 10 and got into Banff and had camp set up and lunch done by 12:30. Then went into town and looked around, went down to the hotel for about an hour or so, went to a dance with Aileen Moody at Banff Springs. The orchestra was fine, 12 pieces. I got a sweater for $5.50, cashmere. The dance was swell. We rode back to camp with a Mountie about 1. The hotel here is larger and grander, but I don't think the scenery even compares with Lake Louise. August 19th. We got up at 5:15 a.m., breakfast at 6, on the road at 7. We got to Calgary about 10, stayed there and looked around for about an hour. I slept until lunchtime. Got out on the mountains about the middle of the morning and drove through rolling plains until late afternoon. We saw a lot of hawks, prairie dogs, and such this afternoon, and crossed back into the good old USA about 4. You can certainly tell the difference in the roads the minute you get back to the U.S. We had no trouble getting across the border. After supper, we went over to the store, got a milkshake, and came back and went to bed about 10. I studied my Demolay part this morning. August 20th. I got up about 8:15. They had quite an experience with skunks trying to steal our bacon, and a windstorm blowing some of the tents down, but I slept right through all of it. This morning we took a trip covering about 150 miles all through the park, and saw some swell scenery. Then got back and stopped at the hotel, and back in camp about 5. Went down to the hotel after supper with Bob and the gang, and met a cute bunch of girls from Boston and Baltimore, and danced till about midnight. Then came back to camp and found a skunk running across my bed. Finally got rid of it and turned in about 1 a.m. August 21. Malta, Montana, 20 miles out at an American Legion health resort. We left Glacier about 8:30 this morning. I studied my demolay part about an hour this morning. We traveled through rolling plains all day and saw huge herds of cattle and horses. Then we had dinner at Harv and got into camp about sundown, 7 o'clock. Set up camp and ate about 9:30. Then went swimming in the Sulphur Springs. First in the hot water bubbling springs, which is 104 degrees, then in the cooler sulfur pool, and finally in the cold water large pool. I got a swell letter from Ann, Mariana, and 3 from home, one with $10 in it. Talked a while and toasted marshmallows, and went to bed about 1. August 22nd, Williston, North Dakota, Municipal Auto Camp. We got started about 9:20 this morning. I've been taking 2-hour sun baths for the last couple of days and took one again this afternoon. We crossed the state line into North Dakota about 4 and got into camp about 5. Ate supper and got dishes done about 9:30. Then went into town with Bob and a bunch of the gang. Wandered around about 3 or 4 hours with the fellows. Tom and I went into a soda shop and all the boys left us, so I stayed with Tom while he drank beers. We talked to various people and walked back to camp about 1, Tom slightly tipsy. August 23rd. Devil's Lake, North Dakota Park, about 5 miles out of town. We left Williston about 8:20 this morning. I talked about all morning, stood on the tailgate most of the afternoon and took in the sun. Nothing much happened today. We got into camp about 6:30 and had a late supper, but it was wonderful. Corn on the cob, pork chops, green beans, hot tea, mixed fruit, and cookies. After the dishes were done, we listened to the radio till about 11:30, then turned in. It started raining about the middle of the night, and I had to get up and move, but didn't get very wet. August 24th, Grand Rapids, Minnesota. We got started about 9 this morning. I slept all day except during lunch. We had a good lunch today. We talked about women, etc. part of the afternoon, and got into camp in the rain for the first time. The rain and hailstorm, electrical too, got worse, and right now, as I write, we don't know whether the bus will come into camp or not. The bus had trouble, but got here about 10. I went to bed as soon as the dishes were done. August 25th. Ashland, Minnesota on Lake Superior, the Great Lakes. Rex's Blue Top Tourist Cabins. It is still raining this morning as we tear down camp. We got started about 9. We've had a slow rain all day, so I've slept most of the time. The rain got harder, and by the time we got to camp it was pouring again, so Billy rented tourist cabins for the group, which was very nice. We played Honeymoon Bridge with Houston for about an hour until the bus arrived. They had another flat tire again today. I had a date with Drew. We went across the road to a tavern and danced about an hour, then down and walked along the lake for a while. I slept on the floor of the cabin that the girls from tents 4 and 5 were in. August 26th, Madison, Wisconsin Municipal Park. I got up fairly early. We got a fairly early start about 8:20 this morning. The weather has cleared up and the sun is shining for once. We went through some beautiful lake country this morning and crossed the line into Wisconsin, and then across into Michigan and back to Wisconsin again about 11. We did that so the boys could say they had been in Michigan. We got to Madison about 5:30, shopped, and arrived at camp about 7. After supper and dishes were done, Billy popped some corn, and we sat around and signed autograph books and talked for about an hour, then went to bed about 11:30. August 27th, Chicago, Illinois on a train going to Cincinnati. Got up about 5:30 this morning a little early so I could pack and clean up, and had breakfast about 8:15. I said all my goodbyes. I'm certainly sorry to leave the group, and got on the road about 10:15. I went swimming right after breakfast with Chris in the lake, and finally got a ride after about an hour's wait. I saw Billy Bacon and Ranny Williams about mid-afternoon, 80 miles out of Madison. Stopped the car and talked with them about 10 minutes and got into Chicago about 4 o'clock. Went to the Black Hawk, Art Jarrett and the Smoothies, the College Inn, Benny Goodman, and just bummed around for 4 hours. Then left on the 9:20 train for Cincinnati. August 28th, Cincinnati, Ohio at 6:10 a.m., Hotel Gibson. I traveled all night from Chicago, tried to sleep now and then, but didn't do so good. We went through Indianapolis about 2:30 and got to the terminal at 6:10. I went down to the Gibson and sat around and talked with the fellows as they came in till about 10. Then went to breakfast with Carl, Jim, and E. Robert. Then registered and talked with the fellows till the banquet. I met Dad Land, who gave a wonderful address. I started to go to the advisors' meeting but left early. Some fellows took me out to see Alice, that I have a date with. I was very pleased. They're rich. Came back to the hotel and went with the parade and snack afterwards, and went to bed about 4:30. August 29th, Hotel Gibson, room 1032, Cincinnati, Ohio. I got up this morning about 7, took a cold shower to wake me up, then went to the honor breakfast, then afterwards to the opening session in the ballroom. It was very cut and dried. We had state degree team practice in the afternoon, and went back to the hotel and dressed for the dinner and degrees. The food and service at the banquet were marvelous. R.C. Surin, an FBI man, spoke. He was pretty good. The degrees were both marvelous, the best I've ever seen done. Then went with Dick Salisbury and another fellow to see the city, and took in the Barbary Coast and all the dives on Central Avenue, and then across the river to Beverly Hills, and went to bed about 5:30. August 30th. Got up about 7 o'clock and had to go to another breakfast. I sat and talked with the fellows until the business section started. Jim's and my election went all right by unanimous vote. The election for J.C. was a hot one. Earl Cummings of T. Jones of Cleveland won. Finally, after a lot of hashing over, the business section was closed for another year. I went to the closing luncheon on Roof Garden. Food was fine. Then rode in the second Crossley car in the parade, and went to practice afterwards. Then met the bus and saw most of the Franzi gang, but not Bob or Houston. Then got dressed and had trouble getting Alice, but finally got to Inst about a half hour late. The in-tow went fine and had a grand time at the dance. Got in about 5:30. Doubled with Lee Myers. August 31st, Cincinnati, finally home. Riley got me up about 9:15. I packed, said goodbyes, and finally got away from the hotel about 11 o'clock. I was worried about Dick and his ride in the car all the way home, and slept most of the way. Riley drove. We got into Marion about 3:30. It certainly seems swell to be at home and see everyone. I went to the show with Ann. She's fine. We saw the movie Dive Bomber. It was good. I stayed over at Ann's till about 1 and slept out in the yard with Barb and Mom. Harold Fralich. Now we have 4 comments on this presentation. The first from Alice G. Ray, my dear wife. Quote, "It is really great to have it made here in the Philippines. I've seen how you worked really hard on it. Harold Fralich must be proud of you, and I'm so proud of you too, doing such a noble job. Alice G. Ray, Quezon City, Philippines." And the next comment is by Patricia Ray, my sister. Quote, "By the way, I actually read Harold's diary of the trip. It was a riot reading it. He sounds so much like Dad. Maybe I'll finally read these ZFMCs as a way to stay connected to you, Peter. I still remember what a nice day we had in Montreux, Switzerland. Patricia A. Ray, Boston, Massachusetts." And a comment from Mark Ray, my brother. Quote, "Thanks for the latest ZFMC. Peter, you are relentless. Just simply awesome. Mark D. Ray, Encinitas, California." And a comment from John S. Ray, my father. Quote, "ZFMC 34 has been received, read, and enjoyed. I do recall that Harold was quite a ladies' man in his earlier days, and this certainly shows up in his diary. The envelope in which the ZFMC arrived was of unusual quality, and the stamps from the Philippines were beautiful. This is really a major expense and effort for you in your new location. Thanks so much. John S. Ray, Cleveland, Ohio, USA. Well, that concludes today's presentation of Harold Fralich's 1941 travel diary. You might consider going to our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history if this interests you. Finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.